Welcome to episode 210 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Lydia Creech
and Andrew Swafford.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1, and in part 2, we will be continuing our Directed by Kelly Reichardt series with 2006's Old Joy. But let's go ahead and jump into the movies that we saw this week. And Andrew, I think I'm going to start with us. We both caught a movie that Nathan wrote about for the website, which I definitely recommend checking out his review because we're about to talk about it, and I feel inadequate to talk about it after reading his review. But either way, we will talk about Support the Girls. The film, it's directed by Andrew Bajowski, who I think we talked about him a little bit during our Greta Gerwig series earlier this year. He was part of that kind of mumblecore movement. And most recently, he's directed a number of indie films such as Results. And I forgot the one he did before Results, but this new one stars Regina Hall and one of the Cinematary faves, Haley Lou Richardson, who we're going to talk about again in a little bit. But Regina Hall plays the general manager of this highway, this sports bar with this quote sports bar with curves, as IMDb says, that is along the highway.
It's a restaurant,
sports bar. It's pretty much Hooters. I guess that's the best visual we can give. It's located on the just along the highway in Texas, and it covers her throughout the day. She's dealing with just very annoying different little small tasks that come up throughout the day, whether it's it starts with somebody being stuck in the ceiling because they were trying to steal money. Then you have just various issues with different employees. Then they're also trying to raise money for another employee. And then you also have the big, the boss of the entire restaurant that is breathing down her neck with various requests. And so it just follows her as she tries to navigate all of this throughout the day, as well as the different employees in this restaurant. Andrew, I'm going to start with you. What did you make of Support the Girls in this? In this little story.
Well, I really loved it. It's one of my favorite movies of the year for sure. And like you, I feel a little inadequate talking about it after reading Nathan's awesome piece, because he's made a bit of a project over the last year of reviewing contemporary movies from a Marxist lens, and this is one that really, really lends itself to that. And he just went super deep on this movie, and I think that his analysis of it is right on, and I think he really sells it. So ignore what Zach and I are going to say and go to cinematary.com and read Nathan's piece. I should also preface this by saying that I watched Support the Girls as part of a double feature with Coyote Ugly, as per the request of my wife. And that probably heightened my enjoyment of Support the Girls quite a bit, because boy, is Coyote Ugly bad. That is a movie that really feels like a made-for-TV film. It is also about pseudo sex work in the food service industry, because of course it's about women dancing on tables at this scummy New York bar. And I think that Support the Girls just has such a more down-to-earth, thoughtful method of approaching that topic. Coyote Ugly just kind of doesn't have a thought in its head. These women are able to kind of switch on the sexy dancer mode without really considering any of the potential the many dilemmas they are faced with in terms of how their situation is intersecting with capitalism and objectification and all sorts of things. Support the Girls is doing that, is thinking about all of these things, but not in a way that comes across as pretentious or academic. It's very much on the ground floor, just dealing with people having mundane interactions and petty drama between them. And it feels like a mumblecore movie at times. It is kind of without a lot of big incident, but it is just whip smart in terms of how everything is framed and how much empathy is given to all of these actors and actresses. It is also incredibly funny. specifically Haley Lu Richardson's character, who is just funny every second she is on screen. I will highlight 2 moments. One is when she is teaching someone how to laugh at a joke that is not funny. And make sure she shows all of her teeth when she's doing so. Just makes me laugh a lot. And also there's a scene where Regina Hall's character steps outside to have a quick private cry to herself. And Haley Richardson jumps out the door, blows off a confetti cannon and says, "We love you," and then jumps back inside. I mean, she's in maybe like 25% of the film, but I'm laughing 100% of the time that she is on screen. Also want to throw my support behind the performance of Regina Hall. Like her character, that acting position is kind of a thankless role because it's not a very showy role, but I think that she captures really perfectly something that Nathan talks about in his piece, which is feeling this weird push and pull of being an authority figure, but also being somebody who has some sort of a personal relationship with the people that you're in authority over, trying to be an empathetic leader, a very difficult thing to do in the corporate business world. Also very relatable for me as a teacher, trying to strike that balance with my students. So I just thought that everything here was like very felt very true to life, felt very smart, very humanistic, and it does some interesting things, not necessarily with the aesthetics of the film, but I've heard some people on Twitter talk about the way that it captures parts of like retail business America, not retail, I should say. What would be like the
food services,
the food service industry, yeah, that doesn't get captured on screen, like showing you back rooms where safes and cash registers and stuff are, that like only spaces that people who work in these occupations get to see, kind of demystifying something that like a Hooters-esque restaurant that is very, very much just like I don't know. We think about it as if it only exists in commercials, and Support the Girls like very much makes it a real space that people live in. Zach, anything else about Support the Girls?
Yeah, I want to echo your the attention to empathy that this film has. It was kind of funny since we're watching Kelly Reichardt movies, and especially we watched River of Grass last week. For this, Support the Girls reminded me of some of the stuff that we were talking about with that movie, where we were discussing how that film is capturing kind of this type of person in a way that you generally don't see on in movies or in narratives, because I think that it's so kind of commonplace for most of us. Like we're so used to seeing people like Haley Lu Richardson's character, Regina Hall's character, because we go to restaurants and we go to places like that so often. Even if it's not a sports bar with curves or a Hooters restaurant, we still see people who are kind of in those types of roles. And so I think that on the outside, the facade of the movie would seem kind of listless and boring, because you're just like, yeah, my friend's a waitress at a restaurant or something. Like there doesn't seem to be anything like cinematic or interesting narratively about that. But I think that empathy just really just flows through in a way that you do. It's not nearly as meditative as Kelly Reichardt's work in what we've talked about so far, but it does have these just very serene moments. I think of later in the film when they're on top of this building and they're kind of they're chilling out and they're drinking some whiskey, and you hear the rush of the cars going by on this highway, and there's something nondescript about that highway. It's something that if you drive down just about anywhere in America, you'll pass through that. It doesn't have to just be Texas. You'll have these large highways with the sound of passing cars. And there's a quote that Regina Hall's character says, that she says, "I love the sound of the highway. If you close your eyes, it sounds like the beach." And I think that the moments where these characters are trying to find some peace and serenity is relatable for anybody just doing any type of job, because I feel like there is this hectic nature to just any type of daily work that somebody who's working a quote 9-to-5 type job in a sense has, and they have to there's those moments during the day that you kind of are allowed to breathe and just kind of, to not sound like a metaphysical douchebag, kind of live in the moment. And Support the Girls has a lot of those moments, especially for Regina Hall's character, and I think that works to what Nathan was talking about in her role as a manager. And I really appreciated that. It was very refreshing and allowed to kind of move the currents of the film along.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this to become more widely available to people. Right now, the only place that you can watch it is by renting it on iTunes, so I encourage you to do that. If you're living in Knoxville, I know that our newly opened Central Cinema is planning on screening this in the coming weeks, so keep your eyes peeled there. But yeah, I think Zach and I both agree this is one of the year's best, and people should not miss it, even though it may seem like a kind of slight indie flick.
Yeah. Also, I immediately thought of when you're talking about the scene where Haley Lou Richardson has the confetti cannon. Lydia, I immediately thought I would love to do that to you on a daily basis, is have a confetti cannon and shoot it and say we love you and then run back inside.
What?
I'm just saying. If I find I need a career change, I'll change to that career. I'm just saying.
Confetti cannon.
Yeah, just for Lydia. I'll just follow you around. Speaking of Haley Lou Richardson, I'm going to transition over to you, Lydia. You caught Columbus, which was a movie we talked a lot about last year, but you finally got around to it.
Yeah, I finally got around to it. I didn't feel like I was in an okay place last year to watch it because I finished my grad school in Bloomington, Indiana, and that's not that far from Columbus. One of the the side character who she works with at the library, like I think he got his Master's of Library Science from Bloomington, which is where I got mine. So, too much like life stuff. But do I need to recap the plot?
It's been a while. Give us a short synopsis.
Okay, so Columbus, Indiana is apparently sort of well known among architecture people, at least, for having a high concentration of buildings that were designed by modernist architects. And so the main character, played by Haley Richardson, she grew up there and she loves all of that stuff. And one day she comes across this Korean man. I guess he's Korean American? Whatever. Who has to come to town because his architect father collapsed suddenly and he's stuck in limbo there waiting to get news from the hospital if his dad's going to get better or not. And they kind of strike up a friendship. She forces a friendship on him. But it's really sweet. This isn't a debut film, is it?
It is.
It is, yeah.
Oh.
He made video essays before this.
Okay, right. I think you had mentioned that before, Zach. I think one of the most really impressive things, he's got a great eye, and I don't know if Columbus, I think one of the things that Haley Richardson's character really loves about this little middle of nowhere town that she grew up in, Midwest, is you have to kind of look for the special things. That's a quality her character has. And oh my god, how do you pronounce this?
Kogonada
also has a really good eye for, I guess if you know the stuff is there, you can draw attention to it, but you have to know first. So I don't know, it felt really gentle, actually. It way less sad than I thought it would be. I know Nathan talked about it on Letterboxd a little bit, kind of being annoyed with some of the cinematography. It looks like a video essay. He puts the camera in one place and it's not very mobile. But structure of the film matches some of the structure and formalism of the, architecture in the film. And there are really nice bookend moments. Like the film opens and it's the father and like his assistant running through the house, and you get these shots from different angles. And then kind of at the end, it's Jin, the Korean American guy, and Haley Richardson's character, and you get kind of the reverse of that, like trying to find each other. So I don't know. It's just pretty impressive and nice to fall into.
I think Nathan's directly said it feels like a culmination of one perfect shot-ification.
I wouldn't call it that. Because it... Okay, what?
I mean, is Ozu a culmination of one perfect shot?
Ozu is himself, guys. Ozu's Ozu.
But I mean, Kogonada is very knowingly pulling from Ozu, right?
Right, and I think it makes sense given the, like I said, content of the film, because sometimes when we were complaining about Blade Runner 2049, for example, like every shot in that is like grand and structured and composed for kind of not really a reason. Like the reason is to make it grand and composed and one perfect shot. And at least in Columbus, it's very consciously reflecting something about the content of the movie. Like, this is how modernist architecture is. So this is how my shots and my framing are going to be. If you could put a modernist building in like a movie form.
Yeah, I think that is true for the pacing and the structure of the movie too. I showed this to some people, and I had to do some research on like what exactly modernist architecture was, because I didn't know. And the gist of it that I got was like buildings that are not composed in a way that has like pragmatism in mind, but more of like, how do we create new forms for spaces for people to walk around in? And I think that the kind of like slow-ish cinema tradition that Kogonada wants to follow is sort of like a modernist. I mean, all film is kind of modernism, I guess, since it comes around the same time as literary modernism. But like it is an architecturally like modernist endeavor to try and make movies that are like shaped differently than. And
I also really like the idea of a modernist church, which they talk about and they explore. So there's also a lot of like just a nice little tour of the modernist architecture. If that's all you cared about, like you could see it in this movie.
Yeah, it's a good walk and talk sightseeing film if you want that.
And it's available on Hulu.
Yes.
Now,
thanks, Zach.
Now we're really, the most exciting part is we're gonna get to hear Lydia talk about a movie with Chloe Grace Moretz in it.
Be nice to Chloe Grace Moretz. I like her.
Hey, I am going to be nice. She was really good in this. Okay, so historic.
Yeah, tell us about the Miseducation of Cameron Post. I apologize.
Okay, so The Miseducation of Cameron Post, it's a film by Desiree Akhavan. Sorry. And it's the first of two films that are coming out now. The other one's got like Russell Crowe and Nicole Kidman, but about a very religious family sending their gay son or daughter to a evangelical church conversion camp school, which, Jesus, it feels like a very specific sort. Evangelical culture is really fascinating to me. Not that I didn't grow up that way, but I've know people who have, and it's this weird like parallel whatever, because the camp that Cameron Post, Chloe Grace Moretz's character, gets sent to is just called God's Promise, and they do like hiking and karaoke nights, and since they yank you out of school, like independent homeschool sort of study, like that I guess could be normal, but then at the same time there these like the people who run the camp are basically misapplying psychology and therapy techniques to emotionally abuse these children that don't need emotional abuse. I mean, no child needs emotional abuse. That's not what I'm suggesting, but especially gay teenagers. And circling back around, I'm sorry in the past I've been mean about Chloe Grace Moretz. I think it's mostly just Chloe Grace Moretz in genre movies. And so, like, maybe all of these actresses that I didn't like in fantasy or action movies should just, like, pivot to indie. She plays Cameron Post. Like, she's not really playing along. I think, like, the miseducation of the title is referring to the kind of miseducation that God's Promise Camp is trying to foist on her. They do a lot of this talk about your iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg is your same-sex attraction. It's not called homosexuality because homosexuality is not real. Keep that in mind. And so underneath the water, like the tip, the part you see, that's the acting out on the same-sex attraction, that's the sin. And then underneath, it's like what psychologically is wrong with you that makes you gay, and you're supposed to fill that out. And that's I feel like Jesse would be able to really speak to this, because this is not how therapy works. This is not how counseling or like psychology works, because the effect is, you know, very shameful and hurtful and like dragging up past trauma that does not have an effect on your sexuality. I mean, you may have trauma, but that's not how that works. And it's so hard to have empathy for people who run this camp, have empathy for parents who would just ship their kid away. And this movie doesn't, which I think is probably important. I feel like the other one that's coming out, because of who the parents are supposed to are big name stars, maybe might not be that way. It'll be interesting to compare them.
Lydia, you haven't seen But I'm a Cheerleader, have you?
No, is that about conversion camps?
It is about gay conversion camp.
Oh.
But it is like a really campy, like mid or early 2000s, like chick flick comedy satire. And it also has no empathy for the people who run the camp and just shamelessly lampoons them for the full runtime. It is a lot of fun.
This one's not fun, but it's really touching, and it kind of highlights something that I guess it has been depicted on film before, actually, but it seems like it's having a moment, just like also examining evangelical culture. Also, the lady who runs the camp is named Lydia. Like, god damn it. She's such a bitch. Not in like an over the top way, just she like shaves a kid's head, which is such a humiliating thing to do to someone, just because his hair is too long, and they make a big thing about being confused about your gender, which is like a weird thing to throw in there. And I know that they're not actively thinking about gender identity in the 90s or whatever. Just, again, it's like this weird taking of something that exists in secular culture and either willfully misunderstanding it or perverting it, like in not the sexual way, I mean perversion, and they mean it, but anyway, twisting it to fit their agenda.
Oh no, Lydia's it's Jennifer L.
I know.
That's so sad.
She's good.
Yeah, it's Jennifer L. She's always good. Anyway.
It's in theaters now.
Lydia, you've been very vocal about 2018 having very few good films. Would you put this in the camp of good films?
Yeah, I'll put it in the camp of good films. I guess, if nothing else.
That didn't seem very confident.
I mean, I'm hopeful for the second half of the year. If nothing else comes out, it might be like in my top 10. So far, no good.
You're just gonna be like bitterly walking around Toronto going, movies are bad.
Oh yeah, next time people hear from us, we'll be in Toronto. That's cool.
All right, we're gonna take a short break. We'll be back talking Old Joy after this.
Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is Andrew Swafford with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company and because we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. Firstly, leave us a review on iTunes, preferably a positive one, because the algorithm gods tell us that reviews increase our podcast's exposure. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send an email to cinematary@yahoo.com so that we can hear from you guys for a change. Maybe you think I'm an idiot for not liking Singing in the Rain, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie that you really want to hear our opinion on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts, and we'll read them out and respond to them on future episodes of Cinematary. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions we bring to you guys every week. So to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and share with your friends and family. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
Look, we're losing because of George Bush.
And the other thing is, we're losing because of George Bush. I mean, you make a really good point, because you look back, and George Bush doesn't. There's no appreciation for any kind of precedent for what went on there. It's just this sort of feeling that we are right and the right will out, and that's wrong. I mean, that doesn't happen there. You can't just will it to happen.
So, like, finally on that, even if you are, like, Hamas is a terrible terrorist group and all our enemies are Arabs and, you're in that thing, and I get Hamas is, I don't want Hamas to win.
Yeah.
I desperately don't want Hamas to win. The last people on earth I want to win anything is Islamic fundamentalists. Okay, that's not going to help me. That's not going to help anybody. Certainly not going to help liberals or progressives. Okay, we don't want that. We're actively trying to fight against that. But even if you're a conservative, you don't even get into those nuances, right? You're like, the damn Arabs and the terrorists, right? But even under that scenario,
and we are back
Bush
with
has
part
led you
2
down
of
the wrong
episode
path.
210 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our directed by Kelly Reichardt series with 2006's Old Joy. This was written by Jonathan Raymond along with Kelly Reichardt. And the film stars Daniel London and Will Oldham, and it follows them as two friends who reunite for a weekend camping trip. Kelly Reichardt was talking to Filmmaker magazine in 2006, and they were asking her why she did not want to give a meaning for the movie to an interviewer before. She said, I didn't say I didn't want to talk about the meaning. I said that we had done a lot of work in the filmmaking to not nail things down, to leave a certain openness and space for people to form their own interpretations and their own experiences. The interview process is about defining things, and it's a difficult process for me after working so hard on not defining certain themes in the movie. She added that ultimately the film is about friendship with, quote, other themes that are a little bit more elusive and a little harder to nail down. In the interview with Filmmaker magazine, she talked about the decision to have the characters listening to left-wing radio for long periods of time, saying, I always thought of the film as being about those lost liberals and their journey deeper into the forest until they become one with it. I don't think it's an overtly political film, but it is set in this particular moment in time, and it deals with the lost ideals of liberalism. A person like Kurt, who doesn't want to live in the mainstream, where does that desire lead him today? I've talked a lot about the films in terms of it being a, quote, new age Western, and I think it's pretty traditional in that sense, except that the competition between these two guys is more about I'm more open than you are. They are still competitive, and I think their inability to really connect to take advantage of the opportunity they have with each other speaks to the state of liberalism in a lot of ways, but those things are so buried. Hopefully when you watch the film, you're just thinking about the two characters and the relationship at hand. She expanded on that point in an interview in 2008 with Mubi, saying, the movie does focus on the infighting within the Democratic Party. That's why we had Air America, which is just a bunch of squabbling Democrats who are so ineffective, and they're just squabbling and petty. And I thought of The Woods and them getting lost as the loss of liberalism. At that time, it was a question of alternative lifestyles. Where does someone like Kurt or someone like Wendy and Lucy fit in amongst real Americans? If they're not real Americans, who are they? Are they of any value to anyone? I think they both ponder the American dream. What is the American dream, you know? On the ending for the movie, Reichardt told Mubi that the homeless man was supposed to be a symbol for Kurt. I always thought of the homeless guy being a foreshadowing of where Kurt could end up. and we found this guy who had the same underjacket that Will was wearing in the same color coat. But he himself, he was a basketball player and had 2 kids and a family and a life. He lived in Vegas, and he had a drinking problem. He had a family and a house and a life. At one point, he had just gotten lost. You probably get to a certain point where you feel like you have some security, but lo and behold, look what's happening to a lot of Americans right now. You realize that this is a completely false security. On the homoerotic undertones of the film, she told Filmmaker magazine that the 2 things that are somewhat inherent in a story about going into the mountains alone with someone, especially if they're going to a hot spring, are the loneliness and desertedness of, or whatever it is, of being in the forest and then sexuality. They're either going to kill each other or they're going to fuck each other. One of those things is bound to happen. A lot of that is just the anticipation that people bring with them from a million years of movie watching. But also, these guys are specifically from Portland, Oregon. And that was part of what interested me in the story in the beginning. I started spending time in Portland 5 or 6 years ago when Todd Haynes moved out there. I visit him every year, and we talk a lot about the difference in men out there and how the lines are maybe drawn more starkly in the East Coast, where you're pretty sure where people stand. There seems to be this ambiguity in Portland. On the film, the New York Times said, all journeys come to an end, and Mark and Kurt's brings the friends almost full circle, back to the same city street where they met up. It's an unceremonious parting, absent any of the warmth that surfaced during their hot spring idyll. From the way Kurt looks at Mark, it seems clear he knows there won't be another reunion. From the way Mark automatically switches on the car radio in its drone, quote, the uncertainty about the future, it's just as evident that only one traveler went anywhere. Joy wears out naturally for some people, others use it up. That Miss Reichardt chooses to end her film with an image of Kurt out in the streets and alive to the world suggests that he hasn't given up on it, and neither has she. On the film, Roger Ebert said, some may think of it as, quote, leisurely or slow-paced, but those qualities contribute to the almost unbearable suspensefulness of Old Joy. There are unarticulated tensions, feelings of sorrow, unease, and even dread that course through the movie like a hidden creek. And when Mark and Kurt finally locate the turnoff to the springs, we see the sky reflected in their windshield, and the whole world turns on this moment. What is about to happen? Will we recognize it when it does, or did it already happen? What did it mean? Old Joy is not going to offer up its secrets, mysteries of the human heart and mind in a glib or factual manner. All you have to do is watch and feel and think. On that note, let's talk a little bit about Old Joy, which, as we just discovered, is going to be a very difficult film to articulate because a lot of the stuff are a lot of the things that happen over the course of the movie are I guess, difficult to articulate. But to that note, I'm going to start, Andrew, with you again as our Kelly Reichardt correspondent, mainly because you've seen this, but mainly because you've seen this movie before. So I'm curious if what's the experience like, kind of going about it the first time and then returning to this movie, because it seems like a movie that would definitely change in a second viewing.
Well, I loved it the first time I watched it. I watched it early in the morning during the summer. And, I just moved into my new house, and I have, all these windows open, all this green around me. And it just, felt like this very nice, pleasant, natural vibe that the movie was adding to. And I found it, even though it has a lot of emotional turmoil within it, I found it a very relaxing movie to watch, kind of like that hot spring bath that they take at the climactic moment. And then going back and rewatching it, I just loved it even more. Every shot felt more intentional. Every theme felt more fully developed, and the pace felt even more pleasant to sit through. And if I could add one bit of information to your info sheet, Zach, after I watched this movie the first time, I went looking for interviews from Kelly Reichardt from the time, trying to get an idea of where she was coming from. And she mentioned that there's this long interim between her making River of Grass in the 90s and her making Old Joy in the 2000s. And is that right? Is it 90s and 2000s? Or is it 80s and 90s?
No, it's 90s and 2000s.
Okay, 90s and 2000s. She said it took her a really long time to get this movie off the ground. And right before she did manage to get the production together, a friend showed her a movie called Blissfully Yours by Apichatpong Weerasethakul. And that seemed to be like the golden nugget for me of like that changed the course of Kelly Reichardt's career. I imagine she saw that and was like, I would like to make American movies like this. And she does. I mean, watching the course of her career, it seems like she is trying to be this American Apichatpong who's like working in all of these traditionally American genres, like the road movie and the Western movie and all this stuff. And, you know, for context, Blissfully Yours is about two distinct couples going out into the woods to fuck. And then after they're done fucking, like their paths intersect with one another. And they're just kind of hanging out and like laying in the sun. And I think that there are a lot of not only pacing and like atmospheric connections between these two filmmakers, but also like just literal like plot beats and content similarities too. So if people like Old Joy, I would recommend checking out Blissfully Yours. But I'm also interested to hear what you guys thought of the movie because. I mean, Zach, you're just working your way through Kelly Reichardt's filmography right now, so.
Yeah, it sounds like a perfect early morning movie as you described. Like that sounds perfect for this because it is this kind of I don't know, there's something so comforting about the overcast weather and the very vibrantly green trees of the forest with the light pitter-patter of the rain. That kind of Pacific Northwest weather pattern seems like, I don't know, to me it seems very comforting. It feels perfect for the melancholy of this trip. It's interesting when I was doing the research for the info sheet, finding the stuff about what she was thinking about politically at the time while making it, because I found the the Air America segments just kind of funny, and just because it's always funny to hear really anybody on either side just sitting there going on some rant about something that clearly they think is like the most important thing of all time. And it was just funny that just anywhere he went, and even with his friend in the car, he was just continuing to go with that as the radio choice. But the thing that I thought about most was just the strange nature of male friendships, and this and I think we talked a little bit about it last week about her choice to focus on two male characters in this movie, which is not something she does. At the rest of or any other point in her career. And there's something really interesting about what she's kind of engaging with on male friendships, because really there's such bizarre, frustrating organisms. You know, there's just these moments where you do feel like there should be some sort of purpose to these conversations. There should be some sort of defining quality to some specific talk, and there are talks that they have. I think one example is when they're by the campfire, when they're spending the night outside, where you can kind of see those frustrations fester with the help of alcohol, because that's usually what helps wedges in between male friendships fester. Is a little bit of alcohol always is key to that. But to me it was just thinking about what it's like to go and visit male friends who I've known forever, and you kind of slide back into that skin that you had when you knew them, and it's such a weird sensation because you're talking with them and you're enjoying your time with them, but it kind of feels like you're re-engaging in this standstill moment of time. I think that you may update them and you do kind of keep up with each other, but there's just this kind of frozen block of time that you enter, and it's a weird sensation because you are constantly as humans just progressing forward and theoretically changing. But when you're in this state, it's like you're going backwards and forwards at the same time. And I felt like Old Joy does a amazing job at capturing that tension of going backwards and forwards at the same time, and trying to navigate a friendship of this nature. But Lydia, I'm curious to hear what you made of the movie.
Sorry, boys don't have friendships.
We have it's all our fault. It's not like it's not like you should feel sympathy for us. It's our own faults, but I'm expressing what it's like.
No, I think while you were talking, I was also connecting that back to what you'd said about, or what she had said in her interview that she did. It's like two liberal dudes just trying to now we would say woke each other. And that really fits in. Like, they want to be good friends, you can tell. But like, and they, I think, intellectually maybe know how, but it's still really hard, and you have to get out of where you're at and like just go off somewhere to even try. And like, that's not a permanent state. So it's also a little bit sad like that.
And they're also kind of going out to the woods for two different reasons, because Will is kind of going, or Kurt, excuse me, the actor's Will. Kurt is going out there to kind of, he's just going out there because that's just kind of what he does. He escapes from, as she said, the mainstream. He escapes from kind of that day-to-day minutia, while Mark seems, the plot, it's funny, the plot synopsis that they have on like Letterboxd is like, Mark's about to have a kid and he just wants a break from that whole thing, so he goes on this camping trip with an old friend. And I was like, that's not really what this is about. I don't think that's a very good synopsis, because his wife is pregnant and they're about to have a kid, but it seems like to him it's just kind of I don't know. He's going out to escape the minutia of the day to day, but it seems like he's going out with a different intention than Kurt is.
I think also Kurt, it's a little bit unfair to just dismiss it as this is just what he does for funsies. I think he's trying to reach out and be friends with Mark, or like anybody, because it doesn't seem like he has anyone. The reviewer that read the ending as optimistic for Kurt, that I was like, no. And Kelly Reichardt, she confirmed it, I guess, when she said like, that homeless dude could be him. Like, he's lost in or not in the woods, and it just like, his reaching out didn't really land for either dude.
And I think that his attempt to reach out is very much tied up in what Zach was talking about with like how men relate to each other, because he's kind of reaching out by showing off. Like, he's showing off and being the woods guru who knows where all the secret stuff is out in the woods, because he doesn't really know where it is because he gets lost. And to go back to that campfire scene, I think it's very telling that, like Zach said, they have to like drink a 6-pack of beer before they start talking about their own feelings, but they also have to like fire a BB gun a bunch of times, and they have to like wax poetic about the nature of the universe and have Kurt brag about how he understands physics more than all the college professors, and then he can say, I miss you. Like, we have to break down all of those barriers, and I think this movie is about these guys breaking down those barriers for themselves. I would place it alongside Catherine Bigelow's Point Break and Claire Denis' Beau Travail as like great movies about masculinity by female directors. From that outside perspective, you can kind of see a lot more than men either see or are willing to admit about themselves.
They're like, we can clearly see that you have to go through like 6 pissing contests to have an actual conversation.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about this. I think Ebert referred to it this way, and I think it's an easy way to kind of label Old Joy as being this kind of listless, leisurely, slow movie. It seems like, and this is kind of just a topic that we return to as a podcast a lot, is trying to not really define slow cinema, but find a way to, I don't know, for me, like sell it to people who would immediately dismiss it, because when we watch stuff like this, it's frustrating because you do, like we've talked about, there is just this really intrinsic narrative value in it. But at the same time, I think if somebody was like, "No, that movie's super boring. I don't know what's going on. They're just going on a camping trip." Like, you couldn't really deny that, because that is kind of what's happening. But I don't know. What do you make of that of trying to kind of interpret this movie and kind of Kelly Reichardt's movies in general because of that?
I think that this movie is a really good example to ask that question about, because I think the movie does a great job of selling itself, selling the value of the style that it is utilizing, specifically with how it bookends itself with these two sequences of political talk radio, right? So political talk radio, or just like keeping up with politics in general, be it on Twitter or on the news or whatever, is really stressful. And you're just like being confronted with all of this conflict all the time. People on opposite sides of the spectrum squabbling with one another. People on the same side of the spectrum squabbling with one another. And you, as a viewer and a recipient of that news, are actually powerless to do anything about it. I mean, you can vote, of course. You can get involved in local politics. But in terms of like just the petty shit that's going on in the world that just like stresses us out, those of us who are keeping up with current events, like, you need an escape from that, right? And the movie, once they get out in the woods, they abandon the political talk radio for about an hour, and then it comes back at the end again, and I had forgotten about it. I'd forgotten it happened at the beginning when it comes back at the end, and I'm like, oh God, this again. And I was so enjoying spending my kind of like free-floating time in the woods and not having to worry about conflict. And most of our movies are about these types of conflicts. Not like inter-political party conflicts, but just like based upon conflict itself. And I think that slow cinema, if we're going to call Old Joy that, it does have conflict within it, but it's a much more like abstract emotional conflict and an internal conflict, kind of people like looking into themselves. And it has this quality of like refreshing you and making you feel more satisfied rather than more agitated by the stressors being thrown at you.
That's a very good point.
I was thinking about last week when we were talking about River of Grass, Andrew, I think you'd mentioned that that's quite a bit more incident heavy than basically the rest of her filmography. And the little plot synopsis that I had seen of Old Joy was like, two dudes get lost in a woods. And I was like, fuck, because people getting lost in the woods movies are usually really like man versus nature sort of conflict, and like starving or wild animals or the elements.
I got Blair Witch vibes a little bit. But because this is Kelly Reichardt and slow cinema, like, it wasn't pummeling you over the head with that sort of like superficial. It's not manufactured conflict because it's nature, but manufactured as far as a plot goes. And yeah, you were saying the hour or whatever in the middle is just like space to breathe and slow down, and you're not like stressed out. Because like political stuff stresses you out on, I don't know, man versus man. Like, if you're going to go really, really basic about the types of conflicts, like man versus man, sort of that level of conflict. And then movies about people getting lost in the woods, like, are they going to starve to death or have to cut their foot off or have like that stresses me out. It's not The Revenant. I haven't seen The Revenant, but The Revenant. And this is not that in a really, really good way. I mean, I would have taken them fighting a bear, honestly. That would have been a nice chance.
Really?
Like, while listening to Air America.
While trying to relate to each other.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the movie being kind of free of incident and being sort of free-floating and relaxing, though we should also mention that this is probably Kelly Reichardt's talkiest movie. My review on Letterboxd was My Hike with a Pitchapong, because it feels like a cross between A Pitchapong's Blissfully Yours and My Dinner with Andre. And I asked you, Lydia, after we finished recording the show last week, how you felt about that monologue in the middle of a ghost story where Will Oldham just kind of waxes philosophical for 5 to 10 minutes and, annoys everyone at the party that he's at, I guess. How annoyed were you by the conversation in this movie, or were you not?
I was. I mean, it's that dude in the woods, like, talking about how he's smarter than the college professors. And, I mean, again, I think she nails this personality type of kind of a liberal dude who just likes to hear himself talk, and he likes to hear.
We wouldn't know anything about that on this podcast.
Who likes to hear himself talk because he's not slowing down to, like, get to that emotional processing point. It's just like, can't have that moment of stillness. It's agitating. Like, Lee is agitated with stillness in River of Grass. So it's that guy with an education in the woods.
That is another great selling point for why slow cinema is important. Like, learn to deal with stillness and not be this guy all the
like
time.
Don't fill the space up with you.
Yeah.
I can just see the memes that Kurt is sharing on Facebook at the moment. As he still refers to Trump as Drumpf. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, that there is something, and it seems much more like in your face in this, because they're actually like in the stillness in the woods alone, but there is this challenge of being fine with stillness and quietness, and just some, again, just a serenity that makes people a little uncomfortable. And I think that might be what works, what's so difficult for some to get into this movie. You also have and this is something that I always kind of love to react to whenever I see a movie for the first time. The example I think of explicitly with it is like in Richard Linklater's movie Boyhood, when there's a scene where the main character is driving to college and there's nothing explicitly happening. He's just driving to college and talking with somebody in the car, but there's something like wired in the brain that goes, something bad's gonna happen. Like the angle of the shots that he takes, the way that the conversation is leading, like a lot of that stuff, you feel like at some point like something's gonna come out and the car is gonna crash and something bad's gonna happen. And there's a lot of moments kind of like that in Old Joy where I'm like, I don't know, something's gonna happen. They're at the campfire. I'm like, yeah, I have like,
they got a gun.
Yeah, there's a gun. They're gonna get lost and it's gonna be forever. I don't know. There's so many of those moments where in my brain the kind of conflict trigger just starts going. Oh, something's gonna happen that's gonna kind of ruin this piece, and it's almost science fiction that nothing actually like that happened, and that they just kind of went on with their lives. That's super absurd, but it's also, there's something kind of like, I don't know. I really like doing. It only works the first time you watch, but I really like movies when that happens, and then at the end, it's like this giant sigh of relief. Like, okay, they're okay. They went home. We're good.
And some people would have the opposite approach to it. They're like watching a movie and thinking, "Dear God, when is something going to happen?" As opposed to, "Oh God, something is going to happen." And I think that the most satisfying part of Old Joy is when they get to the spring, not just because they get to the place that they've been trying to get to the whole movie and conflict resolved, but because that is when the filmmaking allows even more room to breathe than there already was. I mean, once they get in these tubs, her camera is just kind of going all over the place, looking at various birds and dew falling off of leaves and seeing the steam roll out of that little cabin. And it just kind of sits in silence for, I don't know how many minutes, but quite a few minutes before Will Oldham gets up and kind of gives his poetic little story. And there is, and with that stillness comes more like breaking down of barriers. and we have that awesome scene of Will Oldham giving our protagonist a massage, and he's really resisting it at first. And I love how Kelly Reichardt zooms in on his hand as he is like gripping the side of the tub really, really tightly, and then like slowly releases his grip and lets his hand kind of like fall lifelessly into the water as he is like truly relaxed and like has let all the barriers down and is just at peace with this stillness and this intimacy with this other man. It's a really beautiful moment that is beautiful because of the lack of incident. I also think that she does great things with the driving scenes, like you said, Zach. It feels like an extension of what she was doing in River of Grass, where we saw these shots of the highway with narration over them. Here we get these long driving shots with just this really minimalist score from Yo La Tengo over it. And
yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Is just the Yo La Tengo. Those whenever the score will just pop up. It's such a, I mean, it just kind of adds to what we've been talking about, the peacefulness of the entire thing. But it kind of reminded me of a movie we talked about in part one, Columbus.
Yes,
just
that hammock score.
The kind of yeah, just the reverberation that it has.
Yeah, I don't know if this was because I had watched the movie before and I already had fond associations with it, but when the first notes of the Yo La Tengo score came in, my eyes welled up a little bit. I don't know if you guys had any sort of emotional reaction to those sequences, but I do think that they're very beautiful in like the simplicity of them.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's the Columbus was the first film I immediately thought of, just because it's a score you can listen to it on its own, and it does have it's still very refreshing and nice to listen to, but there's just something about the pairing of the images with that reverberating, just almost massaging score that it feels like you're in one of those high-tech chairs where you push the button and it's just like slowly massaging you, and you're about to get kicked out of Best Buy.
The images that we should talk about too, because they're these rolling landscapes of do we know, are we in Washington State in this movie? Oregon. These rolling landscapes of like small town Oregon that also feel like an extension of what she's doing in River of Grass. It's just like documenting what a specific place in America outside of your typical Hollywood sets looks like at a specific moment in time. Yeah, Lydia, go ahead.
It reminded me of Leave No Trace, because I think they actually make it out to Oregon in the second half of that film.
Right, another movie that like really allows you to take comfort in the silence of the woods.
Yeah, definitely. It's I don't know. I think I feel like there's probably a contingency of the listeners who are just like, ugh, we get it. But I don't know. It kind of feels like you went to one of those like you went to some sort of like spa or sauna over the course of like an hour and 15 minutes, however long that the movie is, and then when you get out of it, you're just like, you just feel so at peace, so relaxed. And I don't know. I think that's such a it is kind of nice to have that as a mode of movie, because we have these very conflict heavy movies, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like this like heavy drama, but just any sort of movie where it's like we're constantly having to think about what the next step is going to be, and that kind of can get tiring and stressful, and just I think that people talk.
You get fatigued.
And people always talk about, I'm going to go to the go to the movies to escape, to escape the just onslaught of news and just the reality.
This is
and I feel like this is like the purest form of that. Like it at least it's exploring people, so you're still getting like that intellectual nourishment, but you're also really getting this stillness and this quietness and this peace from the world at the same time. But I feel like at the same time they're gonna be like, no, I want to watch. I would prefer to watch Skyscraper.
Her other movies get a little bit more stressful though they still have the same kind of mundane observational pace. There's a whole lot more like stakes in. I mean, next week, Wendy and Lucy, like that is a high stakes movie. Yeah, Lydia, were you about to say something?
I don't know. It's just I know that at least the next two that have come out like focus on women, and it's just like there's a little bit of an undercurrent.
What do you mean? For In Old Joy?
And not Old Joy. And next week, Wendy and Lucy and Meek's Cutoff.
Gotcha. Any other thoughts about Old Joy, y'all?
It's on Filmstruck now. If you have that, I would recommend checking it out.
With the Criterion C in front of it, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Maybe that means there's going to be a physical release.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I don't know. I think that either they're asleep by now or they've turned us off and they've ignored us, so they're their form of escape. Which we all have our choices. So,
can I just say I'm very glad that you guys are digging the vibe of Kelly Reichardt so far.
Yeah, no, I'm very much digging the vibe, so I'm excited for the next 2 weeks, and it's going to be fun. Next week we have Catherine Fooster and Nicole Seymour, who wrote a book kind of chronicling Kelly Reichardt's career up to this point, talking about Wendy and Lucy with us. So I'm excited to hear their perspective as academics who have studied her and studied her film so far. I think that'll add an interesting perspective to it. But yeah, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us at Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, at Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. Like I said, next week we will be talking about Wendy and Lucy with Catherine Fooster and Nicole Seymour. And be looking for our TIFF diaries. It's kind of weird. We're recording this on Tuesday, and a week from tomorrow we will be in Toronto, Canada, which is strange. But we'll hopefully be putting those out on a daily basis, and there'll be some tacked on to the Wendy and Lucy and possibly the Meek's Cutoff episode also. But for sure you'll be seeing little diaries and rundowns of what we've seen so far at the Toronto Film Festival, so it should be fun. Maybe we can just...
And in the meantime... sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
I was going to say, in the meantime, check out cinematary.com. Definitely read Nathan's review of Support the Girls, and then go watch that movie. It's on iTunes. And then by the time this is out, we will also have published a review of Night is Short, Walk On Girl by Jordan Collier, a great new anime that people should have on their radars. One of the best animated films in quite a while.
Yeah, and I think it opened in New York recently, and it's playing like this kind of strange, almost roadshow type thing with, I think G Kids is doing it. So it might be in your area, but I've only heard good stuff about that movie. So definitely check out that review by Jordan. But yeah, until then, thank you guys for listening. See you next week.